This week is Gum Lesson 7. We're looking at direct and indirect quotations. This one is likely to be a little bit difficult because it's kind of wrapping up a couple of things into one, namely talking about punctuation, and secondly talking about how to use quotes in our writing. So real quick, we'll start with direct quotations, just kind of talking about what they are. They are the exact words of someone else woven into writing. So anytime you're trying to quote directly from a text or from a speech, if you're trying to use their exact words, you want to use a direct quotation. We usually do this when we want to try to give our writing any kind of credibility or kind of add some strength to it. Always when you're using the exact words of the author, you want to use quotation marks. Not using quotation marks is an act of plagiarism. It won't get you thrown in jail, but it'll get you in some serious trouble. So an example of this would be like Henry David Thoreau states, quote, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams, live the life you have imagined." All right, these are his exact words, so we throw them in quotations. When we talk about indirect quotations, what this means is we're taking a paraphrase or a summary of what the author said. This is really, really helpful when we have a lot of stuff that the author is saying, or the speaker, or whomever. It carries meaning in the same way as direct quotes, but it doesn't use those exact words. And so no quotation marks are used. You won't see them at all. And so sometimes you'll see sentences that use this phrase where it says, "said that." Now that's not always an indicator that it's not going to use quotations, but usually if you're using indirect quotations, you're probably going to see the word "that" floating around in there somewhere. Okay? So an example of this would be Henry David Thoreau said that we should live our dreams, period. All right? So this is taking a quote that Henry David Thoreau said. We shorten it up. I think he says, "Go confidently in your dreams, live the life you imagine," is the exact quote. But here we just kind of shorten it up and say, hey, you should live your dreams. It says what he says, it just says it a lot shorter. So what's going on here? First of all, the reason we talk about direct and indirect quotes, that we want to include both of them, is because if we use all of one type, it's boring and it's predictable. And really, if it's predictable, it's boring. So we want to stay away from that. Okay? The other thing is that when we have to use large blocks of text, you can quote a large block of text, but then the formatting in your writing changes entirely. You can't normally quote sentences and sentences of material in a paper and just throw quotation marks around it. So indirect summary is really nice to be able to shorten some things up and kind of get to the point. Direct quotations are good for that precise wording, and they also, because you're using the author's exact words, sometimes the author says it best. And so, if we want to kind of have that strong passion and emotion in there, it pays to kind of leave those as direct quotes. So you want to choose with purpose, all right? Either way, whether you're talking about direct or indirect quotes, anytime you're using quotes and indirect quotes in your writing, you don't want to use a ton of them over and over and over again. And we talk about this in class all the time. It's one thing to use a quote by an author, but what we care more about is your new original thought. So you've taken this thing that somebody else has said and you've put your own spin on it. You're using your own thinking. So knowing how to quote them is important, but yeah, what we do with that quote is more important. All right? So the tricky part about all of this is when we get to punctuation and we talk about direct quotations. So we know that when we use direct quotes, we have to use quotation marks. And when we use quotation marks, that probably means that we're going to have to incorporate some commas as well. So take a look at these examples. This first one is pretty standard stuff. We're using an entire quote. All right, so this is an entire sentence. Here's what we got. Thoreau commented on consumerism and the state of human materialism when he said, comma, and quote, "Our life is frittered away by detail," end quote. So you get to see the comma kind of leads into the statement there. We've got the quotation marks around the exact words, and we end it with a period. All right? Another example, this one is a fragment. So you'll notice a couple of big differences here. It says, anyone who has paid taxes would probably agree with Thoreau, quote, that government is best which governs least, end quote. All right, so in this case, we're taking a portion of what Thoreau says, not the whole sentence. In this case, then, we don't need to lead in with a comma. So like right after Thoreau there, we don't have our comma. And we don't have to capitalize the T in that, all right, because we're only using a part of the quote. The last example would be what we call a direct quote with an interruption. So we're going to take a sentence that says, this world is but a canvas to our imagination, and we want to make a dramatic pause in here. And so we do that by saying this. This world, according to Thoreau, is but a canvas to our imagination. Okay? So again, you'll see kind of a combination here of commas and quotations. The comma kind of carries over, or sorry, the comma after Thoreau carries over that the sentence started kind of there at the beginning. All right. So bottom line is we could probably spend an entire presentation just talking about the punctuation and quotes. But the thing that you need to understand is that there is a difference between these two, and it's important to incorporate a lot of different types of quotes, both direct and indirect, into your writing in order to make it interesting and engaging for the reader. All right. So again, really quick, when we talk about quotations, direct and indirect quotations, direct quotations use the exact words of the author. Indirect quotations are summary, or it's summary of what the author has said. And in the case of direct quotations, we need to be especially mindful of the punctuation that we use. So just a heads up for tomorrow, the quiz on this one might be a little bit tricky, but again, this is a process that isn't really picked up in one video, in one quiz. This is kind of an ongoing process, but it's important that we talk about it here.